And we're on.
And action. Hey, Lance.
Hey, Brett. How's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I am doing great.
It has been a while.
It's been a hot minute.
It has. It's the summer and the decade.
That's right.
All conspiring together to make a weekly rhythm pretty hard to
That's right.
keep.
Absolutely.
Well, we're here together now, and that's what's important. Great to see you. Looking forward to talking about Gallup's latest report, State of the Global Workplace 2023. It's the State of the Global Workplace 2023 report, the voice of the world's employees.
It's great. Great branding. And I will say, like, all jokes aside, I mean, who has spent more time with longitudinal data than Gallup on this topic? I mean, it's just impressive. I mean, just like to do this for what 23 years, I think they've done surveying on. It gives us all this great data points, and it's fun to make fun of Gallup because they're just like an old fuddy-duddy company that's just been around forever. But like, thank goodness they started asking these questions, right? I mean, like, because it's given us a ton of data. But it's quite the ambitious write-up.
Well, yeah, and this report's been around for a long time. I will say that Gallup's been around forever.
Yeah,
and one of the reasons they always stuck in my mind is because when I went to college in 1991 to 1995, when I was in college, a lot of kids who were looking for summer jobs or looking for a job right after college would go to work for Gallup in Austin in their call centers to do phone surveys. And I remember it was a terrible job. I never had it, but everyone who had it complained because they got paid per completed survey.
Yes.
And, that brings up all kinds of questions about data collection and surveying and everything. But yes, it is, it's a snapshot. It's a longitudinal study. It is the most significant that is done in the world. It is effective at providing a baseline for certain concepts that we care a lot about in employee experience. I've got a lot of questions about the findings, but, I just want to be careful because I think a lot of times when people talk about reports like these, they talk about the findings as if the findings are tangible in some uniquely descriptive way that stays the same over time. So, so I want to talk a little bit about the structure at the same time. So, for instance, this report released only a couple of days ago, covering 2022, right? So this is all the data collected in 2022, reports released in 2023. The first insight in the executive summary is the percentage of employees thriving at work reached a record high in 2022. And that's measured by employee engagement. And so we saw employee engagement go up to 22 in 2019, down to 20 in 2020, up to 21 in 2021, and then up to 23 in 2022. Boy, that was really confusing the way I said it. 22, 20, 21, 23.
That's right.
And so we know that employee engagement has been on a steady increase, right, for a long time. It's kind of like moving around in the low 20s right now. So I'm just curious, is it significant to talk about the percentage of employees? So I'm going to go back even further. When you're measuring employee engagement, can you make the headline about thriving? The percentage of employees thriving at work reached a record high in 2022.
Right.
Because the engagement score hit 23, which the previous high was 22, but it was 22, 20, 21, 23. So kind of two things there. Is it, appropriate to say that engagement has reached a record high when it's 1 point above what it was, 3 years ago? And is it appropriate to use the word thriving when describing employee engagement? Go.
Well, I mean, there's a lot of loaded stuff in there. One of them is, I mean, I think, from somebody who does a lot of research or reporting, even something as and again, I just spent like the first few minutes talking about how good Gallup is and how big and how significant their work is on this space. But to your point, a 1 point difference is within the margin of error of anything outside of a population survey, right? So, like, I mean, even if you're like talking to 100,000 employees, you still got a margin of error there. It's just as likely that it could be 24 or 22. It could be there's some issues with calling it like definitively a record. Highest we've measured would be I think more accurate. But I mean, that's just sort of a research qualm with that. I mean, I think the bigger question is like when you look at what 20 a score of 20 23 as thriving. I mean, when you look at sort of the rest of the population and you see, obviously continued disengagement, whether it's just sort of active or whether it's passive. I wouldn't call it thriving. Like I would definitely use a different word to describe what's going on in the workforce, especially. And I think this is really important for anybody who's consuming research, especially on work. I read way too many of these reports that to be healthy. I should go touch grass, as the kids say, sometimes, rather than just keep reading these reports. But you have to contextualize with what's going on in the world. I mean, we've got also record breaking like burnout at work, highest measured ever, as far as people continuing to drop, not come back to the workforce. They dropped out in the pandemic and they are not coming back. They are taking significant financial hit just to not deal with whatever this is. So yeah, I mean, you have to. I mean, so. I would not use the word thriving. I think things like you said. I think if you look long term, workplaces are getting better in sort of the geologic time scale, not necessarily in like what have we done the last 3 years. So it's good that we haven't given up a bunch of ground on these big surveys. At the same time, like things are not well. At work for sure. What do you think?
Well, I think a lot of this comes down to copywriting, right? And so there's the data and there's the copywriting. And I think it's important to distinguish between the two.
Yep.
Again, I almost feel like, Lance, for you sometimes, it's a real risk to your personal brand to be in a conversation with me. So I always want to be careful about taking something too far. And I also want to be really clear that Lance probably doesn't agree with most of the stuff that I say most of the time. So, let's put that out there.
Yeah.
We're not two people who agree all the time about the same things. And so
that's right.
I hope that's what makes this a productive conversation. But
for sure,
I would say this, that what this report is based on is a measure of employee engagement. You and I have seen the questions. We're familiar with the questions that are asked in order to get the engagement score. And then we see the copywriting about the scores. And the copywriting is typically associated. It's more temporal in nature. It's more, what are the concepts of the time? And how does this measure that has been going on since 2009? That's how long Gallup has been tracking engagement. And we all know that if you're going to do a longitudinal study, you can't change the questions.
Right.
And so the questions remain the same, but the interpretations of the questions change over time. We see this in, for instance, personality assessments all the time, where to create a big, database of responses over time, you can't change the questions. But, if you remember like the Berkman, we use the Berkman a lot. The Berkman's one of the older personality assessments, and the questions in the assessment are still like, would you rather be a clerk or a forest ranger? And how do you take, those questions where the context has changed so much over time, keep them stable, and then, still address the moment that we're in now, whatever that moment is at any given time. And that's where the gap between like copywriting and data measurement comes in, is that the copywriting is used to tie it to the moment. And that is an act in and of itself of interpretation of the results and time to time. So, here's my, just kind of overall response. I'll get to thriving because I think in their second point, there's kind of a little bit more like, well, what is thriving? What does that mean? But I would say that in 2019, according to Gallup, employee engagement, as they've been measuring it since 2009, hit 22. In 2020, it went down 2 points to 20. In 2021, it went up 1 point. And in 2022, it's gone up 2 points, right? So over the course of the last 4 years, from 2019 to 2022, as reported in 2023, you basically see a variance of 3 points,
Right.
So 22, 20, 21, 23, around this notion that is, remained fairly intact since 2009, which is employee engagement, not thriving, none of the copywriting words that are used, but engagement. It sure seems to me that the variance in people's employee experience has changed a lot more than that and been a lot more erratic over the past 4 years than what is captured in an engagement score for the world. It's a global score that, has varied by, 2 or 3 points, and usually 1 point in this direction or the other. And so my, personal assessment is that engagement is a thing, but tying engagement to an experience, like how people are actually feeling, how people, feel about their work, about why they feel certain ways about their work. I'm not sure that the engagement score captures it anymore, because when you see an engagement score fluctuate 3 points over the last 4 years, I mean, I can't think of anything in my personal life, including my work life, or anyone else's that I know that has been that stable. You know what I mean? So what's the deal with, like, what does engagement actually measure, and why does it move so little compared to the big swings of human emotion and productivity and output and connection and stuff like that? What do you think about that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think it's one of the things that, I mean, I'm going back a little bit here, but when I talked to like Greg Harris over at Quantum Workplace about just we've been working on engagement for better part of a decade, and trying to improve it. We've seen like organizations do great transformations, and then you sort of see the baseline not change when you look at sort of the large organization. So, are we just seeing a few great? Are we seeing just basically a bell curve of average performance being sort of like this? About a quarter of your workforce being engaged. That's like sort of the middle of the bell curve, and everything else is like you've got a bunch of companies that are, on the other side of that, getting to the extremes, and then you've got some very high extremes, but not enough to pull that average up enough. So I don't know if it defies explanation, but I think it also probably goes to, at least for Gallup's case, just I think the sheer breadth of their reporting is that, I mean, one of the things that you're going to get is you're going to get very slow changes over the course of years, even when it seems like people are going up, people are going down. But maybe when you average those two things, the high points are taken down by the low points and that sort of thing. So, to me, I think that's really it's really about the size of things. I also think part of it is we expect that things to change so quickly, and things have obviously changed really dramatically. But I think when we look at other headlines about work, we see how tough it is for attitudes to actually change. Like, people are, even if they're in not a great job, they're thankful to have a job. If they're like purposefully driven by work, even if it's not the best environment, they're going to report well. And to your point, the questions haven't changed in that survey. And so, I would expect that their attitudes about work aren't changing significantly year over year either. And so really, until you dive into, okay, what's driving some of this, is that you actually start getting some of the more interesting data, I think, about like, hey, do I feel, do I feel like I have a purpose, or do I have autonomy? I mean, I think some of the things that have sort of come to light since Gallup created the survey, about what we know drives people at work, that could be the key to unlocking, I think, some of the insights here.
Mhm.
But to your point, I mean, like, is it interesting that it stayed so stable? Yes, but also, like, maybe not, because like people's attitudes, even with massive change, don't necessarily change as quickly as we'd like to see them.
And that's, I think, the point for me.
Yeah,
Is like, what is this measuring? Is this measuring something about the experience, or is this
yeah,
measuring something about the person?
yeah,
You know what I'm saying? And I think, like, if we go down to, kind of the second point, uh, number two, the majority of the world's employees are quiet quitting. Okay, so that's a newer phrase. Another example of the copywriting, drafting behind
that's
issues of
right.
the day versus like what the score, is actually reflecting based on the questions that are asked. So
Yep,
Gallup would say 23% of people in the world, this is global, are thriving at work. 59% are quiet quitting, which they have in parentheses. And this is, again, really interesting. 23% of people thriving at work, parenthetical, engaged, right? So
yeah,
they're saying that's the engagement score. And what we're going to say this year is that means thriving at work.
that's right.
59% are quiet quitting, not engaged.
That's right.
18% are loud quitting, actively disengaged, right? Okay,
Yep,
so what does that mean? It says increasing engagement is good news for employees who are thriving at work and finding their daily work more rewarding. But there's also a long way to go for the last, since 2009. Most workers are quiet quitting, not engaged, or loud quitting, actively engaged. And this is where you start to get a little insight into where these numbers are coming from. What does thriving at work mean? These employees find their work meaningful and feel connected to the team and their organization. They feel
yep,
proud of the work they do, and they take ownership of their performance, going the extra mile for teammates and customers. That copy is tied directly to the questions that are asked, right?
right.
People who find their work meaningful, feel connected to the team, connected to the organization, proud of the work, take ownership of their performance, go the extra mile for teammates and for customers. And so that's the baseline of questions that have been asked for a long time. That's the engagement set of questions. And then, they take that data set and they apply it, to whatever the labels are of the day that they want to use in copywriting. For me, I would say the more that the concepts associated with the data change over time in a longitudinal study, the more the actual numbers stay fairly consistent because they're no longer measuring something that is incredibly significant within a specific moment of time. Like if they had said, okay, in addition to an engagement study, we're going to do a thriving study.
Yeah,
And we're going to describe thriving as A, B, C, D, E, F, and G. And we're going to create a whole new set of questions. You might have seen much more variance in the thriving scores over, say, the past 5 years than you would see in the engagement scores.
yeah,
As an example, Gallup also measures, public sentiment against a wide range of issues. They've recently started measuring, people's attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs around trans issues.
yep,
Now, what you see is that in the past few years, people's attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs around trans issues have just changed dramatically. I mean,
yeah,
dramatically. And that seems to track more with the zeitgeist, right?
yeah,
It's like there's something going on in the world. You see it in the numbers.
yep,
When you get to, the employee experience has changed dramatically,
yep,
right? And I do not believe that engagement is a measure of the employee experience. I think that engagement becomes more of like a Rorschach test. It's more of like an individual response to everything that's going on all the time. This is like how people just walk through life. They're either
yeah,
going to be engaged or disengaged. And, if the employee experience becomes so great or so bad, it might accentuate certain tendencies that they already have, but it's not going to be the primary driver of those. So I think that engagement has become more of almost a personality assessment than it has an assessment of the experience that people are having at work.
yeah. I mean, I think you kind of captured my thoughts on this too, because I think whenever you ask somebody what a good workplace looks like, I don't think that's changed a lot. Um, I mean, I think I go back to sort of a marketing context of like, yeah, some of the features of like a good workplace is, but how a good workplace makes me feel at the end of the day, the things I'm doing, like my perceptions of that don't radically change. From year to year, or I mean, even decade to decade. Honestly, if I look back, back to when I started the Star Conspiracy 10 years ago, I don't know if I told you like what a engaged workplace feels like then versus now, if I'd be answering those questions any differently. So like, I mean, yeah, to your point, it's just like kind of a personality, personal preferences sort of thing, and I think that's probably why, because people don't change that quickly, um, why those numbers stay so, and it's not just engagement, it's the actively disengaged and the not engaged at work that have stayed very consistent. We did see like probably the biggest changes during the pandemic, especially when you look at some of their more monthly reporting, so not the annual reporting, but if you look at some of the big changes that took place, basically from March to September
Mm-hmm.
of 2020, there were some big. I mean, like if you look at like sort of their month to month data, and I'll have to see if I can find it. But like it went from like these little tiny
Mm-hmm.
foothills to like Mount Everest and Death Valley and
Yeah.
like up and down and up and down. So you definitely see some of it, but then when you sort of just normalize the data over a year, it's like, all right, it went down at one point.
Yeah. Yeah. And so, moving on from that point, no pun intended. Number three, although the world has recovered from the worst of the pandemic, employee stress remained at a record high level. So employee stress, 44%.
Yeah.
And that's as high as it was in 2021. But if you go back to 2009, when stress was first measured, that was 31. So that's, gone up by 13 points since 2009. But, just a couple of, interesting observations here. Again, it's the copywriting.
Yeah.
The headline says, although the world has recovered from the worst of the pandemic,
Yeah.
employee stress remained at a record high level. And so the implication is that stress is tied to the pandemic,
Right.
right? In this context. Duh, right? Like I think would all agree with that intuitively. But there also seems to be some counterintuitive stuff here, which is they're saying, yeah, but that, we've mostly recovered from that and people are still stressed. But I think the most interesting thing about this section is that when people are engaged, only 30% of them are stressed. When people are actively disengaged, 56% of them are stressed.
Yeah.
And so this is a correlation versus causation thing, right? It's like, are people stressed because they're disengaged, or are they disengaged because they're stressed? And I think the way the headline's written, the way this copy is written, the implicit, position is that stress is a driver of engagement or disengagement, right? And isn't it also possible that an individual's capacity to be engaged also has an impact on the way they manage stress? So if you are the kind of person who's just more likely to be engaged anyway, is it also possible that you're the kind of person who experiences stress less than people who are inclined to be disengaged and inclined to be stressed? Does that make sense?
It it does, and it's one of the challenges with sort of pulling that connection to light is, I mean, I would not bank on engagement and stress being related at all, other than that they have similar sort of like correlating numbers. And to your point, it's just, I mean, it's just as likely. It's probably actually more likely. My gut check is, like if I thought it was really truly about engagement, I would expect that number of stressed employees to not be 14 points off of the baseline. Like that's
Yeah.
not, I mean, that's big, that's significant, but it's not like it's a third off.
Yeah.
I'd expect it to be half, 3/4.
Yeah.
I'd expect a big reduction if engagement actually made a difference. So that's kind of the challenge here, is that because you're not creating a causation, you're not creating causality there, that you can just like gut check anything. You can kind of pull whatever narrative through on that front. I'm more inclined to say, hey, people that are engaged, that have sort of that engaged mindset, are probably finding ways to handle stress in a way, are privileged enough to not have to deal with stress as much as some of the people that are probably on the disengaged side, um, or on the non-engaged side. So, that would be my interpretation of it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I think the most important thing is, like, obviously stress is still very high. I
Yeah.
think, I think the copywriting here should be like, hey, you think everything's back to normal, and lots of things have kind of returned that way, but work is definitely not that way.
Mm-mm.
People are much more stressed than they were before the pandemic, and even though lots of things have normalized, that has not changed.
Mm-hmm.
And so, like, that's, regardless of whether you've got engaged or not engaged or actively disengaged, folks, it's something you have to tackle.
Yeah. And, lest I come across as someone who says, well, you can't fucking do anything about engagement because that's just, an
Right.
inherent quality to an individual. That's not what I believe at all, because I think that one of the things that the prevailing narrative around engagement does not capture is the very engaged employee, because they have these inherent characteristics that allow them to be engaged and allow them to manage stress. They're more resilient, right? It's an individual resilience issue. Um, Rarely is there the case study of the person who's highly engaged, who has low levels of stress, and leaves a job and goes and finds another job because the work experience was bad. They were still engaged in their work. They care
Yeah.
about their work. They care about doing a good job. They're effective at managing stress. They're resilient, et cetera, but they still know a shitty work experience when they see one, and they move on to the next place. And that's not really captured in the narrative associated with how people have been reporting and how Gallup has been reporting on engagement scores and the associated scores for so long.
That's right.
And so I think they're different. And I think in our model, employee experience is above all of this stuff. It's a higher order concept that brings in employer, employer brand, recruitment, marketing, candidate experience, work experience, and employee success. Many of the issues reported on by Gallup, kind of fall into the work experience area, and many fall into the employee success area. Two different areas in our measure. But you can't say, hey, we're really going to focus on pay and benefits, or we're really going to focus on friction in the work experience, and expect that one approach is going to be the thing that increases engagement, because I do not think that engagement actually correlates with experience. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah, it does. And I think, I don't know, because I don't think there's really been any. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't know if there's been any research to say whether or not engagement correlates with experience. I haven't seen it. If it is out there, I'd love to read about it, because I'd love to dig into that. But yeah, to my point on this, I would say you've got to, if you're looking at actually improving your organization, you've got to look at sort of those key outcomes. We've divided it into 5 different pieces, which can be measured, which can be, you could drive outcomes across those domains. You have to do it, kind of comprehensively across the board there too. That's one of the real challenges, is that I think people compartmentalize these issues. They think, well, we'll fix pay equity, we'll fix learning and development, we'll fix career pathing, we'll fix all these different things, and then you don't fix anything else, or you don't set yourself up for success because you're not onboarding employees this way, or you're not advertising, or you're not creating a great brand experience for employees. So yeah, it's something where I think when we're looking for actionable things to do about this data, you have to look outside of what Gallup is offering here. You say, this is interesting, this hits some of the trouble points, it gives us some of the justification to go and say, hey, look, here's the baseline. Maybe we're doing worse than this, but the solution isn't wrapped up in this data.
Yeah.
Solution's wrapped up elsewhere, right?
That's right. It's a classic surrogation, right? It's like if everybody is creating their strategy based on the numbers they're trying to hit in individual domains, that doesn't mean that they're actually achieving the experience goals they want. You brought up
That's
a
right.
very interesting thing, which is, I don't know if anyone is really correlating experience to engagement. And
Yeah.
the answer is no. And I'll go even further and say, because you can't.
Right.
And this is where, the mind shift has to occur. What is employee experience? Employee experience is simply a perception of the quality of time spent with a company. That's it. And when a lot of people hear that definition, when they say perception of the quality of time spent with a company, they think quality means good or bad. Was it a good experience? Was it a bad experience? And that's not what it means at all. Quality in that context specifically means the essential nature and defining characteristics of the company. So in a defining moment is that which people feel the essential nature and the defining characteristics of a company has come to reveal itself. In a big moment, you really find out who a company is, right?
Yep.
And so the employee experience that every company wants to create is different than every other company. And the success of an organization in employee experience really comes down to how well they're delivering on the defining characteristics, the essential nature of the employee experience they want to create. Inside your own company, you can measure your achievement against the employee experience that you want to create, and you can correlate that to outcomes such as engagement, productivity, etc. But you can't benchmark it, because if you're benchmarking against your employee experience and someone else is benchmarking against their employee experience, they should be trying to achieve two different things, two different qualities of experience. Now, you could say, well, the overall success in organizations getting to their experience, regardless of what that experience is, maybe that could be benchmarked and correlated in some, kind of bigger way. But I think it misses the point, because the reality is, if you want to create a differentiated work experience, if you want to be an employer of choice, if you want to dive into, the type of experience that you want to create in shared moments with others, that's an essentially authentic and localized, experience to that particular company. And we have a hard time dealing with concepts of difference as opposed to concepts associated to sameness, like a benchmark, like something that we can compare ourselves to others on. But that's what's really missing here, is that, the reason that there's very slight movements in engagement around the globe is because we're asking everyone the same questions about the same thing. And then after trying to tie that into the different outcomes of our organization. So, the last point in this report that I think we'll hit today is number 7. Quiet quitting employees know what they would change about their workplace. In this report, we asked respondents, what would you change about your workplace to make it better? 85% of the responses offered by those considered to be quiet quitting, so that's that group of people who are not engaged, but they're not loud quitting.
Yep.
They're not, actively disengaged, which comprises the majority of employees, were related to engagement or culture, pay and benefits, or well-being and work-life balance. But again, that's even a false, from a copywriting perspective, characterization, because 41% of the factors are under engagement or culture, 16% are under well-being. That's a bigger gap than, anything that they're reporting in their top line results. And then you get under engagement or culture, and the bullet points are, for everyone to get recognized for their contributions. I would like it if the managers were more approachable and we could talk openly. They should grant more autonomy in the work to stimulate everyone's creativity. I would like to learn more things, but the work I do is quite repetitive. I just wish they respected me more, giving everyone a fair chance and getting promoted, clearer goals, and stronger guidance, right?
Yep.
So these are the things that people who are quiet quitting would change about their company. Would that cause them to become engaged?
That's the real question, isn't it? So, like, I don't know, and that's probably that's the real challenge, right? That's why selling sort of engagement programs this way ultimately fail, because you can't be driving outcomes that way around somebody's, really, I think the thing that just sort of like to take away from this is almost a personal belief system about work and about, the places where they work. You can't bank on changing that. What you can bank on is changing the conditions of the experience, things that you can control, offering up everything on the employee success side, on the work experience side, on creating a great employer brand that's aligned with your vision, values, mission, etc. Those are things that you could go out and say, yes, we are doing this. When we ask people, did we describe ourselves correctly? Is the experience what you expected? Take your beliefs out of this about what an engaged workplace looks like, and like, is this what you were promised? Or if not, are we creating that moment, that disconnect, that break in the script, for better or for worse? Right. So that's ultimately, I think, whenever, especially HR leaders, work leaders in general, are looking at these types of programs, they have to reconsider how they're pitching and what outcomes they're actually pitching in this. And that's why, I mean, I think engagements, again, it's great to have these baseline reports. It's great to get the longitudinal data, but at the same time, like, how helpful is it to create the right experience for your organization? To your point, I don't.
I don't know either.
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the real problem, right? Because if you knew, then it'd be easy.
Yeah, then it'd be easy. But I think you landed on some very important things there. I think most issues with people's work experience are not based on the facts of the experience.
Yeah.
They're based on breaks in continuity between what their expectations were and what the experience actually ends up being. Right.
Yep.
And so when people are promoting flexibility and there's no flexibility, when people are promoting, a leading comp and the comp is not leading, or it becomes not leading at some point, it's those breaks in continuity that reflect upon the experience. But, here's the big picture for me. Everyone knows that they should try to create a good employee experience. Everyone knows that creating a good employee experience is going to have positive business outcomes.
Yep.
Right. And so define the quality of experience you want to create, the, essential nature and defining characteristics, navigate towards that, have your measures in place for what the downstream outcomes are, but don't let the numbers drive the strategy after that. Because remember, you were trying to create an experience because you knew that creating a good experience would drive good outcomes, right? But when you start focusing on the outcomes that everyone tells you should be focused on, and you start defining initiatives and programs aimed at those specific numbers and outcomes, what you'll find is that often the things that you do end up running counter to the experience that you wanted to create when you formed the abstract notion of the essential nature and defining characteristics of the employee experience. So I think that people need to do more work around defining the quality of employee experience they want to create. They need to do more work around making sure that experience is woven in to their employer brand, their recruitment marketing, their candidate experience, their work experience, and their employee success. And they need to focus more on the measurement of the achievement of their goals for creating that experience, and use these other things as signposts for being evaluated through the experience they want to create. And so, meaning that if, they see this number or that number or the other number going really high or really low, they need to look at that number and say, well, how important is this specifically to the experience that we're trying to create? And how do we address it through the lens of that experience, as opposed to, well, now let's put all our resources over here because, we're not doing well on the, pay and benefits component. And we're getting dinged on that. But a lot of times, like if I ask a group of people at a place that, they really love, where they know that they could make more money somewhere else, if I ask them, how do you feel about pay and benefits? They may say, yeah, pay and benefits sucks here. Yeah. But that's not, the reason that they're there.
That's right. Yeah, exactly.
And so if I come over here and I focus all on pay and benefits and I take money away from the other things that are core to the experience I'm trying to create, I could actually end up killing my employee experience in service of a point that people are saying are important, that people think are important to engagement. And all that stuff has to be contextualized within your own culture.
Yeah. Last point I'll make, because I know we're getting close to time here, but I think the only study that's really created a causal link between employee experience and customer experience and shareholder experience, because they talked about a grocery store chain that basically took in a an academic environment, took sort of all their measures from their stores, and then they did some testing on the employee experience, and then what could they actually attach to that. The things they didn't focus on were employee engagement, scores or anything along those lines. They controlled things like schedule flexibility, and then schedule stability, too. When you think about grocery stores, you think about changing schedules, that sort of thing. They also focused on training. So 3 things that a company could control and that could measure, and that they could, ask very pointed questions from them. And then, they saw in the stores that they were able to make these changes in, and the stores that they weren't, a significant difference in store productivity, store sales, that sort of thing. And then they were able to directly sort of, take out all the other factors, control for the other factors that were in there to create a causal relationship between this. They weren't doing it based off of engagement scores or beliefs about their well-being at work. They said, are you getting the schedule that you need? Is it flexible enough for you? Are you trained enough? If not, let's get you like some really tactical training on how to do your job better so you feel more confident in it. We weren't asking people these questions, and that's how you get it. So like, I really encourage people to look at that again. I've mentioned it a couple times in the newsletter. I'll continue to mention it because it's just a really easy template to say, you want to create a connection here. There's a template out there already, and it's not things that you have to like depend on somebody's attitudes, behaviors, and beliefs to change. It's things that you can control if you wish to, and if you have the ability to do so. That's really what I keep coming back to when I look at this sort of data. Is like there's a way forward. We're just not seeing it sometimes.
Well, let's drop that report into the description. Let's drop the Gallup report into the description. And I would say great conversation.
Yeah.
I'll close by saying everyone should read, the State of Global Workplace 2023 report, The Voice of the World's Employees by Gallup. But I would also say if you're reading it and you're not challenging it, then you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
If you're reading it and just saying this is fact and we need to navigate towards all of these points, or if you have confirmation bias and you say, see this, see that, that's exactly what's happening here, you're doing it wrong. Yeah. Be a reader who challenges and ask deeper questions. And I think you'll get more out of reports like this. The report that you mentioned, I think the most interesting thing about it for me in this moment is that, well, why did they ask those questions about scheduling and training? Because they had decided that those were pillars to the experience they wanted to create, that those were the most important things for them. And I think that's the kind of exercise that everyone needs to go through.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lance Hahn. I appreciate the conversation.
Yeah, it was fun.
It's been too long.
Let's do it again.
I'm out next week, but let's do it again.
All right.
Enjoy your summer, everyone out there, and you too, Lance, and talk to everyone soon.
Sounds good.